All right. Hello and welcome to day 2 of Astromagia 2023. We're joined today for our morning or afternoon keynote with Alkistis Demek. Thanks for making time to be with us today, Alkistis.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for opening the conference to me.
It's always open to you, Alkistis. Alkistis, I'm so excited for what you're going to share today. For those that don't know Alkistis is an artist, dancer, and writer and occultist, exploring the mysteries of the carnal body and its subtle anatomy through an archaeology and poetics of flesh. With Peter Gray, she co-founded and runs Scarlet Imprint, a small press which publishes practitioner-oriented works on magic, esotericism, and the sacred. Her art and praxis is grounded in Ankoku Buto, with dark dance, which she has practiced since 2002. Delighted to have you, Alkistis. So I'm here with you the whole time, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First, it's just an absolute delight to be here and to be out presenting my work in the world again. And thank you to JD and to everybody who has made this conference what it is, including everybody attending, because it's just so nice to share things together. Okay, I'm just going to get into this and hopefully we'll have time to talk about if anything comes up. I'm speaking on Stars of Babalon, Celestial Theophanies, and the Poetics of Flesh. Part 1. Heaven has become one with the depths. In 1900, Aleister Crowley departed for Mexico. There he took up the challenge of ascending through the 30 ethers revealed and recounted through the conversations of the Elizabethan magus John Dee and his scryer Edward Kelly with angelic intelligences. But he abandoned the attempt after bagging the 29th ether. Crowley resumed his campaign in late 1909 in Algeria, this time accompanied by his lover and disciple, the poet Victor Neuburg, his head shaved, save for 2 locks twisted into horns on his temples. That's Vicky, not Aleister. Aleister recalls in Confessions, I was thus able to pass him off as a demon that I had tamed and trained to serve me. This greatly enhanced my eminence. Crowley had with him his personal grimoire, Ol Sonuf Vaura Saji, and forgive my mangled mispronunciation of the Golden Dawn pronunciation of Enochian, which contained the Enochian calls or keys to open the ethers. On the 23rd of November, Crowley, as magician and scryer, with Vicky acting as scribe, entered the 28th ether. A still tangible sense of exhilaration and adventure emanates from the accounts. Leaving the desert oasis of Posada, the two journeyed further into the unknown, to the outermost limits of the human world. As told in the magical dilemma of Victor Neuburg, we called them. We went out into the desert and called them. We didn't know what would happen. I will note December the 3rd as significant because Crowley and the Faunish Neuburg performed a ritual sexual act dedicated to Pan on the summit of Mount Daleh Adin. It was the first time that Crowley, taking the passive role, had made homosexual sex a sacrament. He wrote, I sacrificed myself. The fire of the all-seeing sun smote down upon the altar, consuming every particle of my personality. The rite allowed Crowley to shed all remaining inhibitions and obstacles to further progress, and presages his initiation into the 12th ether on the night of December the 4th to the 5th. In the vision of the 12th ether, Eloi, Crowley receives a great part of the revelation of the mystical nature of the Scarlet Woman, Babalon, the mother of abominations, subverting John's vision in his encounter with the charioteer who bears her cup of whoredom, a direct reference to the woman of Revelation 17:4, who holds a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. John's image is an allusion to Rome and its practices, perceived as inimical to early Christian communities. With Rome no longer the political or religious force it once was, the image and the secret meaning of the woman seated on the beast was freed, the fin de siècle brought a revaluation of values, including a reappraisal of sex. I wish to draw attention to one comment in the vision on the cup, which I believe is of crucial import to the nature of the goddess and to our contemporary crisis. He writes, or records, "The wine is such that its virtue radiateth through the cup, and I reel under the intoxication of it, and every thought is destroyed by it. It abideth alone, and its name is compassion. I understand by compassion the sacrament of suffering, partaken of by true worshippers of the highest. And it is an ecstasy in which there is no trace of pain. Its passivity, its passion, is like the giving up of the self to the beloved." On December the 6th, Crowley enters the 10th accursed ether, Zodar X, where he will invoke and overcome the mighty devil of the abyss, Choronzon. It is a Solomonic working. Crowley, in the triangle, wrestles with the encircled victor. Once he has obtained the ether, he writes the name Babalon in the ring, with his ring in the sand, to banish the demon, ostensibly the first use of this spelling, B-A-B-A-L-O-N, as opposed to the spelling in the Book of Revelation. The rituals performed in the Algerian desert prefigure Crowley's formulation of his theory and techniques of sex magic. It is a turning point, mirroring the crisis experienced by Dee, Kelly, and their wives at the angelic instruction to cross-match that led to the apocalyptic speech of the Daughter of Fortitude, so uncannily redolent of the Gnostic text Thunder Perfect Mind. The paradoxical utterances of the female voice, often identified as Sophia or wisdom, such as, "I am the whore and the Holy One," are echoed in the Daughter of Fortitude's, "I am a harlot for such as ravish me, and a virgin with such as know me not." The whole expedition is recounted in the Vision and the Voice and Confessions, and a sensitive reading of the emergence of a Thelemic Babylon through an exegesis of Crowley's writings is given by Manon Haydenborg-White in The Eloquent Blood. My intention here is to establish the essential context of this timely emergence, to comment on her appearance, nature, and powers as a very specific manifestation of the great goddess and the implications this carries for us and for our times. I believe Crowley must have already noted and speculated on, and doubtless calculated the gematria of the word Babylon when he first read Dee's Conversations with Angels. In Enochian, Babylon is wickedness, and Babalon, a harlot. The resonances with John of Patmos's vision of Babylon are striking, and would not have been lost on Aleister, raised by the Plymouth Brethren, and identified both by his mother and himself with the beast 666. An undated text, in a Japanese vellum notebook in the Warburg, references Babylon and the Great Dragon. That's Babylon spelled with the A, with this spelling that Crowley innovated. Although undated, this short piece, apparently a condensed and highly personal interpretation of Revelation, with connections made between the narrative and astrological significance of the minor arcana of the Tarot in the Golden Dawn system. Other texts in the same book are dated to 1904, that is, long before the Algerian workings and after the time in Mexico. Haydenborg-White considers the text to have been written after The Vision and the Voice and before 1919, but notes that its emphasis on Revelation and the Golden Dawn suggests a composition date closer to 1909. She doesn't offer any evidence, and I haven't found any evidence for her dating. However, I think the text is more likely to predate Crowley's scrying of the ethers and in the Algerian desert. It appears to represent a fusing of his magical foundation in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn with the apocalyptic motifs so strongly impressed on him during his brethren upbringing. If so, this 1904 text is his earliest recorded use of the Enochian word to name John's harlot, indicating that Crowley had been engaged in these thoughts more than 5 years before the Algerian campaign. Babylon Mystica and Babylon Incarnata. I've given here a brief overview of the emergence of Babylon at this critical juncture within Crowley's magical work, and the awakening of hitherto suppressed aspects of his eros. I want to emphasize how she is born amidst the fierce heat of arousal and the pursuit of a highly experimental magic, an ambitious synthesis of visionary Enochian and evocatory goetic forms, imbued with the schema of Kabbalistic correspondences of the Golden Dawn and motifs of John's Apocalyptic. Nietzsche, the prophet of this dawning era, saw the creation of new gods, goddesses, and demons as one of the highest of human activities, writing in a notebook, "How many new gods are still possible?" These gods will be born of our bodily drives, our impulses, ancient forces clothed in new flesh. Crowley's visions of Babylon in the Aethys are striking as an eruption into the sacred of a singular archetype of woman, a phantasm, in the sense Lyotard ascribes to Klosowski's term, that is, something that grips the wild turbulence of the libido, something it invents as an incandescent object. I can attest to the powerful fascination her phantasm exerts on me, a woman. Her effect on both sexes is profound. In his Apocalypse of 1932, D.H. Lawrence writes, "Splendid she sits, and splendid is her Babylon." How the late apocalypticists love mouthing out all about the gold and the silver and cinnamon of evil Babylon. How they envy Babylon her splendor, envy, envy. How they love destroying it all. The harlot sits magnificent with her golden cup of the wine of sensual pleasure in her hand. Both Crowley and Lawrence recognized in the figure of the harlot a potent, affirmative, and initiatory power at the threshold of a new era or eon. The question of the goddess is always the question of woman. The distinction between carnal and divine is complex and ambiguous. Crowley had seen the new woman. He met Isadora Duncan, the greatest dancer of her generation, he records, at a party in 1910. And in the same year, Leila Waddell would become his mistress, his divine whore, his mother of heaven, his scarlet woman and whore of Babylon, for whom he wrote Waratah Blossoms and many of the poems in the Book of Lies. But despite knowing and loving many remarkable women, Crowley was unable to grant them equal status to his beast. His scarlet women were subordinate and adjunct to his authority as prophet. Though radical in its time, his is a closed system and fundamentally misunderstands the sexual dynamic and male and female sexuality. There are no magical formulas or techniques specific to women's bodies and sexuality. Crowley's articulation of sex magic rested upon a fundamental error, that woman possesses no creative power of her own. Crowley's Thelema is solar-phallic and spermognostic. Babylon, though central to his initiatic system and sex magic, is restricted to a primarily mystical role. But if we should speak of a Babylon mystica, she, who is mystery, alien and unknowable, we must also speak of a Babylon incarnata, a Babylon of flesh, blood, breath, and decay. The distinction between carnal and divine is complex, ambiguous, and the very nature of our flesh exposes this. In a fragment from an unpublished manuscript, Sophia Philosophia of 1941, Alexandre Kojève, who's a fascinating figure, a philosopher, a Russian émigré, a political and religious philosopher. He invented the European Union, and he was an interpreter of Hegel, whose influential lectures in Paris from 1933 to 1939 were attended by the likes of Georges Bataille, Pierre Glazowski, Simone de Beauvoir, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Walter Benjamin. He addresses the question of woman in Sophia Philosophia, whom he associates with subversive and revolutionary action. We're no longer trapped in the pseudo-philosophical theologism of the revelations of divine men. A woman's individuality, her subjectivity, is expressed. Women are raised to the plane of philosophical self-consciousness. He writes, these women, not only do they want to speak, but they also want to speak about themselves, speaking about themselves. And he is very in favor of this. He understands this is a necessary stage in the evolution of human consciousness. Kojève intuits the danger that woman poses to all inclusive and contained systems, all non-living systems. Hers is a living force, alive like flame, desiring, devouring. His insight resonates with my personal gnosis, that the harlot not only disrupts the orthodoxy of Thelema, when interpreted as a fixed religious system rather than the precept of do what thou wilt, but fundamentally breaks it. Crowley left little in the way of instruction or guidance for those who are drawn to Babalon. Beyond the vision and the voice, there is Liber-Heth. Crowley's Babalon is foremost a mystical conception of the goddess as Grail. She has no mythology, despite her coming into being beneath the desert stars. And her heptagram, the stellar associations of the goddess, are constrained by adherence to the golden dawn tree of life, where she resides in Bina, that is, as understanding, Saturn. She is not found in what D.H. Lawrence calls the ancient zodiacal heavens, the magnificent fields of the stars. Thus I've sought a language and a praxis rooted in the carnal body, independent of the solar-phallic doctrine of Thelema. My initial experiences were in vision and dream, and soon became possession states which were spontaneous and occurred outside the temple, outside a framework or a structure that might hold or mediate the experience for me. In consequence, I drew on my training in Buto and other movement modalities to navigate these psychosomatic crises. Movements came forth unbidden. Forms flicker, appear, dissolve. Tremors cascade into seismic shifts, releasing hybrid and alien figurations. The sex pulses hypnotically, throbbing, kindling the entire pelvic bowl, with the heat rising up the spine and flowing down the legs. The intelligence that communicates in these states is distinctive. She is provocative, disruptive, desirous. To be filled with her presence is to be engulfed, engorged with a deep light, and the inner space deepens and extends. This uncharted spiritual terrain is strewn with dangers, which I will address later. It is also a place of questioning into the nature of eros, sex, and the flesh as the source and the site of these experiences, and into the nature of Babalon as the divine power that has seized the body's erotic potential. To what end? The mystical formula of Liber-Heth can be put quite simply: every drop of blood into the cup. The beauty and power of the formula is in its simplicity, but it gives little in terms of direction, nor any further elucidation of the nature of the goddess. To this end, I made investigations into the Babalon of Revelation as the archetype and the source of Crowley's Babalon, tracing John's harlot to her origin in Inana-Ishtar and the corpus of poetic, mythic, and stellar lore associated with her. I propose that this corpus can be understood as a prehistory of Babalon, that the stellar theophanies of the hierodule in Inana-Ishtar are celestial bodies of the whore, Babalon. I contend that engaging with these theophanies can reveal hidden or obscured aspects of the goddess who is coming into being, and suggest ways of incorporating astral magic within an oracular embodied praxis. Whilst the source from which Babalon emerges, sex, is still more remote than the archaic representations of the goddess, I intuit that this sexual libidinal drive is deeply implicated with the ancient light of the living heavens. And all this is implicated with the future in potentia. Part 2. Celestial theophanies, a hierodule over heaven. Crowley associated Babalon with the number 156, 156, and with a seven-pointed star. 7 is a primary number, is a number of primary importance in the Book of Revelation, of course. And the source of this prominence can be traced ultimately to Mesopotamia, where it is central to cosmology and mathematics and musical theory. The number 7 is symbolic of perfection and totality, and is associated with Inana-Ishtar, and Hedwana's hymn to the temple of Inanna at Uruk makes the connection explicit. House of heaven, house of 7 corners, 7 fires raised at night, 7 flames of desire, your princess is on the horizon. I felt drawn to approach Babalon in the heavens, looking back to the celestial theophanies of Inana-Ishtar. Just as in my dance work, I explore corporeal archetypes that emerge through the process of improvisation and states of possession. In Suma, the goddess was a being of stone, star, and blood. She storms, seduces, she rains venom, she flowers, she seizes, and she speaks through ecstatic bodies. She's radiant, dynamic, elemental. Her power extends through chains of correspondences connecting stars, stones, metals, plants, colors, tones. In Mesopotamia, the doctrine of sympathies is attested from clay tablets dating back to around 3000 BCE. Astrology is the master art. Celestial bodies, the planets, govern the affinities. This occult doctrine, as above, so below, underlies the art of divination and the magical manipulation of materia, images, idols and effigies, talismans, and so forth, through a chain of activation. A number of celestial and sublunary phenomena are identified or associated with Inana-Ishtar, who we must remember should not be thought of as a single deity, but as many Inanas and many Ishtars, worshipped over millennia and across different geographical and cultural territories. So I like to imagine the cup that you find in Revelation. All of this has just flowed into it and somehow flows out again from the cup into the figure of Babalon and into our present understanding. First and foremost, she is identified with Venus as morning and as evening star. She is associated with constellations also, notably the wagon and the bow, with prominent stars including Sirius and Spica. An association with the full moon is implied by her mystical number, 15, which has further significance in Mesopotamian music theory and cosmology. She wears the crescent moon as a headdress on several Hellenistic alabaster goddess figurines found in burials, the lunar crescent indicative of her potency. In her astral manifestations, she is intricately connected to the rhythms of the heavens. As Venus, she harmonizes the solar and lunar cycles. And the Crowley's number for her, 156, is arrived by multiplying 12 by 13, so it's also a lunisolar affinity. As the scholar Francesca Rochberg noted, an aspect of the conception of the divine that is significant for understanding the relation between deity and star is the idea of awesome divine radiance expressed in both Sumerian and Akkadian religious discourse with the term melemu. In Sumerian liturgy, for example, the radiance of the goddess Inanna is a principal element in her description of the planet Venus, and anyone who sees Venus understands quite this spellbinding, scintillating, powerful it almost grips you when you're watching her. An aura of terrifying radiance belongs to both the star, the planet, and goddess, a converging of astral and divine features that points to a continuity between the appearance of the divinity and her communication through astral phenomena, or heavenly writing, as it was called. It has been proposed that the conceptualization of the goddess in a Syro-Babylonian narrative and mythos influenced the interpretation of celestial portents. So there is an entangling between the narratives of her different myths and the way portents connected to Venus were interpreted. They were seen in the light of these mythic tales. So one of the things that I do is simply observe Babalon, Venus. I feel that this connection is just being present rather than as an idea, but seeing her, whether it is in the evening or in the morning, is a very important part of, well, I see it as to greet her. For now, example, now I'm greeting her in daybreak and hymning her, I speak to her, and I drink her light with my eyes, because it feels as though there is a communication happening. There is just this single expanse of light and sky between us. And I feel that she's communicating in a way that is not something that is translated into words, but is simply this resonance is established between my body and the star as I gaze at her. When observed from a geocentric perspective, Venus has an 8-year rhythm, which formed the subject of the world's oldest astrological text, the Venus tablet from Nineveh. It was part of a series called the Enuma Anu Enlil, the Book of the Gods of Heaven and Earth, dated to the 17th century BCE. It effectively records the 5 synodic periods of Venus, giving a series of 10 omens over the 8-year cycle, through the patterns of Venus's appearance and disappearance from view. I think one of the really fascinating things that I've discovered by this obsession, I have a kind of obsession with Venus, which manifested finally in the piece Visitation, which I performed a few years ago. And I have tried to do something which I learned from Mesopotamian astrology, which was that there is not a separation between astronomy and astrology as such, but that they are both based on the same single observation of the skies and the heavens and the phenomena, the celestial beings that inhabit them. And so on the one hand, I've been researching as much as I can about our latest understanding, scientific, of Venus, and on the other hand, digging into the archaeology and the mythology of the goddess Inana-Ishtar and of Venus as it was understood in Mesopotamia, because I feel that there must be some current that runs from the very distant past into our present understandings. And it's so often that they are talked about. I think it was Cadmus yesterday was speaking how there seems sometimes to be such a different understanding, or the classical understanding of a planet is so different from what we know about the planet now, and it doesn't bear any relation. And I've tried through my devotional praxis with Babalon to bring these two together, to bridge this, to look to the future and to look behind the veil of the planet Venus as far as we can, as well as to examine and spend time with the hymns and the myths to Inana-Ishtar and understand what this force, this goddess, this potency represented to, well, many cultures in the ancient Near East. And there is a continuity as Inana-Ishtar becomes Aphrodite, becomes Venus, and continues to flow through. There is a distinct line there. It's not and there are many resonances between Crowley's Babalon and Inana-Ishtar, many, including, for example, the color red, the association with sexuality and the erotic. He has a much more mystical experience, but in Mesopotamia, there's almost a more earthy experience, understanding of this energy. It's very much more grounded in the body, and Crowley, I feel, is unable to embrace the more carnal aspects of divine experience or knowledge. Just moving. I just wanted to as well mention Ursa Major more specifically, as I've incorporated small rite to Ursa Major, the wagon, Margida in Mesopotamian, also identified with Ishtar and her heavenly manifestation as the planet Venus. She's a circumpolar constellation, so never sets, and as a result can be invoked at any time of the year, as Erica Reiner makes clear. The wagon was called the Bond of Heaven and Venus in the East, and Reiner notes, the constellation of the wagon is the one most frequently beseeched to irradiate the substance exposed to it. So I've also incorporated this both with Venus and with Ursa Major of exposing, for example, rose water or rose oil to the light of the constellation and the star to absorb those potencies, and then those live on my altar and I use them ritually. So ways to incant, she talks about it as being this stellar irradiation she describes as incanting the stars, and I just find that such a beautiful, beautiful expression. So I observe a small rite to Ursa Major on the 25th lunar day, which is also Dakini Day in Vajrayana Buddhism, by lighting a candle and incense on the altar and staying with her in meditation. So it's just very simple, but it's just an observance, because one of the things I found with Babalon is that there's just simply no guidance at all. So, and what quite the opposite to Inana-Ishtar, who seems to regulate the heavens and time periods from both time periods which we can understand in terms of weeks to years to great astrological lengths. So Venus harmonizes so many different calendrical counts and is so intimately connected with time through all these manifestations, both as Ursa Major has a very similar, Ursa Major was also used to calculate certain, I think it was to do with the new year, when precisely the new year was. So in all of the constellations or astral phenomena connected with Inana-Ishtar, there is a very clear relationship to a harmonizing of the heavens and a counting of time. And I find that this aspect is missing from Crowley, but is definitively there with Babalon. It's implied by the dawning of the new eon and so on, but it's always restricted in him to, he is the decisive figure and not the stellar manifestation. It's really all about him as the beast. The starry body. In Mesopotamian texts, celestial phenomena are anthropomorphized and described using figurative language, such that their bodies are adorned with crowns and garments, which indicate phenomena such as planetary halos and degrees of luminosity. Inanna is the radiant star, Venus, the great light which fills the holy heavens. She is described in hymns as the lady of all the great ornaments and much bejeweled. Cultic hymns described by Fry Mackenzie as a celebration of Inanna as vulva lay bare the ecstatic nature of her language as she celebrates the allure of her own body. This is the planet Venus hymning herself, celebrating herself in ecstatic language. The hymn of Dumuzi and Inanna's courtship elaborates on her ritual of adornment. She finds the jewel of gold in the form of nakedness. Nakedness is synonymous with the vulva. And she puts it on the hair of her head She finds the narrow gold earring, puts them on her ears. She finds the bronze burnished eardrops and puts them on her earlobes. She finds the jewel which drips like honey and puts it on her eyes. There is a deeper significance to her embellishment. Her body, adorned with gold and living stones, with scented oil and cosmetics, a symphony of materia sacra that embody the goddess and that extend her influence into the world. Those who come into contact with these substances are touched by the goddess. As noted by Dr. Kim Benzel, identity and presence could reside in both the organic body and the inorganic objects that were in contact with the body. And she goes on, such jewelry would require, just as the cult images themselves did, prescribed materials and procedures of manufacture in order to activate the extended presence or distributed agency of the biological body, or perhaps conversely to activate the transformation of the biological body or the star into a sacred, cultic, or even divine entity. She's speaking specifically here about the funerary jewelry of Queen Pu'abi, who was discovered in which was the city of Inana-Ishtar, her principal city. Very similar methods of manufacture and thinking around jewelry were also applicable to the dressing of cult statues, where so the statue of Inana-Ishtar or Inanna would have been robed and dressed in jewels made in a very similar way to the way Dr. Benzel describes. In an interview, she gives a fascinating insight into the ritual creation of cultic jewelry. Pieces of gold being painstakingly heated and hammered so as not to cut or solder and to keep the gold pieces intact and seamless, making it hard to perceive that there was a hand behind it. This exceedingly labor-intensive method was another way of activating the divine. It is this ritualized chain of activation from materials to making that in some way removes the hand of the maker. It is a very prescribed, and rarely does it vary. It just seems to me that the ritual prescription of how to make something was not only to create beauty, but for the express purpose of activating the next step. And in my opinion, in to activate those dead bodies, or become perhaps divine in death, or appear divine in death. And these same methods of manufacture would have been, along with the ritual of the cleansing, the cleaning of the mouth and the opening of the mouth, which were used with cult statues in Mesopotamia, similarly to the opening of the mouth ritual in Egypt, the actual dressing and the creation of the jewelry that adorns the statue is part of the endowment of power and just continually reinforces the connection with the divine through this chain of correspondences, particularly. From the great heaven, she set her mind on the great below. So Inanna's self-adornment for her lover, Dumuzi, mirrors that for the descent to the underworld of Ereshkigal. She anoints her body with oils, perfume, potency. Quote, I will quote from the myth, it's beautiful. She took the 7 divine powers. She collected the divine powers and grasped them in her hand. With the divine powers, she went on her way. She put on a turban, headgear for the open country on her head. She took a wig for her forehead. She hung small lapis lazuli beads around her neck. She placed twin egg-shaped beads on her breast. She covered her body with a parlor dress, the garment of ladyship. She placed mascara, which is called "Let a man come, let him come," on her eyes. She pulled the pectoral, which is called "Come, man, come," over her breast. She placed a golden ring on her hand. She held the lapis lazuli measuring rod and measuring line in her hand. So the goddess, the planet, herself is adorning herself with the accoutrements of power. They both represent her power, but they are her power. There is no distinction. So these objects, the adornments of the goddess are cognate with the energies emanating from the heavens. At each of the 7 gates that she must pass through in her catabasis, she is divested of one of these attributes of power, stripped of her divine radiance, by the removal of her clothing and adornments. And when naked, in the final rite of the underworld, she is made a corpse. And the corpse was hung on a hook. In Inana-Ishtar's attempt to seize the throne of the underworld, she is turned into a corpse. Thus we see through myth, hymns, stellar lore, and religious function, she embodies the spectrum of incarnate existence, from the nubile, still inexperienced young woman to the erotic consummation of desire with her lover Dumuzi, to the pitiful state, and not just with him, but to many other unfortunate lovers too, to the pitiful state of a corpse, and thence the resurrection of her body and powers. Some thoughts on adornment. As celestial bodies and cultic statues embodied the goddess, so too did her priestesses. They share the epithet nugig, hierodule, with the goddess, who is addressed as hierodule over heaven in many, many texts. The epithet is used when Inanna demonstrably exercises or extends her power, so should be considered in relation to ritual adornment as the embodiment of the Mies, these divine powers. What is fascinating is how the title is used for both goddess and priestess, for goddess and woman, from star and woman. This points to the special and quite distinct relationship that the goddess star, Inana-Ishtar, has with mortals. This is seen most spectacularly in her relation to prophecy and her capacity to possess and speak through her devotees. Simo Parpala writes, "To achieve union, one had to emulate the goddess, particularly her sufferings and agony. One way of doing this was self-inflicted bodily pain. Another way of emulating the goddess was incessant weeping, sighing, lamenting." He draws attention to the activation of the eyes and the lips, which leads to the apparition of the goddess as either a vision or a voice. Of note too, Nugig seems originally to have been a cultic title for midwife. The word apparently signifies something taboo, as in inapproachable or untouchable, a quality that belongs to the sacred, and again pointing to the goddess's authority over the threshold and liminal and transitional places and experiences, including those which we may not consider traditionally sacred today. It's both the sacre gauche and the sacre droite are under the domain. We should not be afraid to embody the starry goddess through jewelry, clothing, and cosmetics. There is a theory that connects menstrual blood with the creation of symbolic culture. This is a theory that's been elaborated and proposed by Chris Knight and Camilla Power. And it's fascinating, but it really, they hypothesize female cosmetic coalitions as initially gathering, creating symbolic culture out of the resonance between the color of menstrual blood and the importance to create a group for strength within a community in early hominid or early human culture, well, before culture. And the use of pigments, these cosmetic coalitions were women painting their bodies in order to create a group so that all of the women are menstruating at once. It's there is menstrual synchrony, but it was a way of protecting from predatory males by gathering all the women together, all painted with ochre. So the use of pigments derived from ochres, specularite, which is a form of hematite, and black manganese. We have evidence for this ritualized use of pigments, and these are really stunning, like blood reds. And the specularite is it's black with it's shiny, so the manganese and the specularite create this almost like a starry sky, like black, 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 but with sparkles in it. So bodies that are covered in this ritualistic makeup is already such a profound transformation of the body and the person within this body. And I think this is between in Africa between 300 and 500,000 years ago. So it's like at an incredibly deep depth. And so it fascinates me that we have the symbolic culture comes through this process that connects with the blood and connects with the stars, connects with the way heavens would have looked to people then, because they were so much more immediate. The same time frame is assumed for the domestication of fire. So we are in a way in the prehistory of angelic transmission. This is the Neolithic strata that you find in the Enochic texts. We have pigments, we have the beginnings of analogical and symbolic culture. We have this relationship with fire, and we have the relationship with the heavens, the observation of the heavens as a living entity. I think as well that the connection with menstrual blood is interesting because underlying this creation of symbolic culture has to be a kind of erotic excess, similar to Bataille hypothesizing with the accursed share. There has to be more than we need in order for us to begin to build these layers of meaning around us, almost like creating a cocoon of culture around us that enables us to interact both with each other but with the heavens. You know, this is the beginning of the weaving of stories, and already we have like the sort of the breakdown of the colors: red, black, white. Very, 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 very simple but beautiful. And the materia magica. This is a Neolithic culture. Stones like lapis lazuli. The Mesopotamians called it the stone of speech and vision. These stones can endow the wearer with the numinous forces they carry, and they can also be incanted, as I spoke about earlier, referring to Erika Reiner's work, with stellar influences to reinforce or to capture and transmit these qualities and attach them even more potently to a wearer. And I'm interested too in how the flesh is, by its nature, receptive also to such influences, such irradiation and incantation, not just through adornment, not just through the contagion of proximity or wearing, but it is also able, the flesh, to undergo a deep process of transformation in communion with the numinous and these forces, these daimonic drives that Nietzsche talks about, in ecstatic or altered states of consciousness. Part 3, a poetics of flesh. The erotic. Inana-Ishtar is a goddess of war and sexual love, both intensely physical domains where the body approaches and meets its limit. Similarly, Babalon is a goddess of the threshold and the limit experience. She confronts us above all in the erotic. The erotic impulse is the life in us. It is the single most powerful force that moves through us. It is a force which binds and unites, which tears apart and destroys. It must be mastered, or if that's too strong or loaded a word, let us say trained or cultivated. It has to be known and allowed to come forth. The importance of Babalon. Why do we need this goddess now? Why is she pressing so hard on my consciousness and others in this time? She is an ancient whore astride a beast. I mean, the imagery is archaic and strange. It's fascinating. It's very powerful, but it seems so disconnected now to what the world we live in. But it is precisely because She captivates us and brings us into the heart of this erotic struggle within ourselves and in relation to others. The erotic force individuates. We see the work of the erotic in our individuality, in poiesis, in creating. So, our sexual energy, the erotic energy, is not simply to continue the species. It's clearly not. We clearly have such an abundance of it that it's not simply so that there are going to be more humans in 20 years or 50 years. It's so much more than that. And this is one of this was the question I asked her right at the beginning. I want to understand sex. I want to understand what this is. At the time, I was a completely crisis broken individual, even more than I am now. But I had been through so many crises in which it was the sexual energy that actually brought me through it, that actually enabled me to transform what felt like depressions and violent mood swings that I was unable to deal with. It was this erotic energy, the sexual energy, that enabled me to push through. So it was really fundamental to just my surviving into adulthood, and a very, like, this thing started for me very, I was 14, 15 when I started having quite like violent and difficult mood swings, and essentially what's medicine likes to call bipolar disorder now. No, the erotic, I believe, is this energy which impels us outward, that compels us to create, that makes us look at the stars and wonder and be struck with awe. And I'm tingling and be filled with this numinous experience. Isn't the thing that just like makes our skin open and sing to the entire wonder of existence, this erotic energy? It opens us to the other, it opens us to others, it drives us deeper into those remote interiorities that otherwise we would prefer not to have to go down into. The erotic breaks down the rigid patterns of trauma and wounding, both emotional and physical. And this breaking down doesn't have to be a traumatic or violent or loud process. This can be a gentle process. These are something where when one learns how to use this energy, one is also able to use it as Paracelsus describes the medicine. It's in the dose. It can be very poisonous. And I said at the beginning that there are dangers in this terrain, and the erotic is dangerous. And I don't want to overlook that, because I've had very much firsthand experience of how it can go wrong. And especially working with a force like Babalon, even speaking about a force like Babalon can go wrong. So there is I do not want to make this into something which is aspirational or some kind of something you might want to I don't know. It's very personal. It's not something that I would feel comfortable sharing, other than I felt it necessary to put some things out about what I consider to be the nature of this goddess through my experiences of her. And yes, there is a dosage with it, and one can learn how to work with this. I entered perimenopause a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now. And that was also quite a catastrophic experience in terms of working with this energy. But it also taught me a lot, because it taught me in even more detail and specificity how to work with this energy, how to work with it in a way that preserved my body rather than just burnt it out, how to work with it in a way that is more life-affirming rather than simply, well, I wouldn't say I ever worked with it in an escapist sense, but one can get carried away by the delirium of these experiences. And there has to be a continuity. And there has to also be, I think, a way of sharing or distributing this energy in life-affirming ways, rather than ego-building ways. Yes, in these gentle dosages, it softens or dissolves ossified structures in our consciousness and psyche, and allows new growth to push through. And this thing about this energy is that it is a living energy. And the ornamentation that are described around the figure of Inana-Ishtar, and also on the figure of the Harlot of Revelation, who is also adorned with precious stones and gold, golded with gold. This ornamentation is partaking with, well, look at ancient jewelry. It possesses what the architect and visionary Christopher Alexander calls living structure. And I feel that the erotic energy, when allowed to manifest through creativity, through culture, will start to manifest this beauty in the world, will turn the living stones and the metals and the plants and our materia into creations which sing, and which sing to the heavens, and which sing to our hearts. And this way we can speak to each other and share each other's interiors, share each other's pleasures, be with each other through these expressions of beauty, which are fundamentally connected with this erotic energy. But it is perhaps, as I've said, it is perhaps the drive most easily diverted or gamed or misused in our current moment. The body is the site of pain and trauma. It is inescapable in us. When I participated in a flesh pool ritual many years ago, what I learned, hooded in the depths of the night, the weight of my body held by an ancient yew. What I learned as I pulled against the mighty tree was that I am my body. I learned how to be present to the sensations of my mortality, neither pain nor pleasure, no release, no ecstasy, no vision, but the cold of the night, of the earth beneath my feet, of the steel hooks in my chest. I felt an implacable aloneness in the stillness of this realization. I am this body. And yet this body is not an I. It is an opening, a multitude. It is pierced by the other, and it is pregnant with potentiality. The body is not an entity, but a relational existence between the other and the self. I want to close by talking a little about the poetics. Have I got time, JD? I wanted to just close by talking a little about the poetics of flesh as I understand it.
Got plenty of time.
Okay.
We have another 30 minutes.
Okay, so there'll be time for some discussion if there's any interest. Any questions? Pierre Klosowski wrote, every theophany is a pathophanny. So if the goddess has stellar theophanies, celestial theophanies, surely this goddess also has pathophannies. Surely we also experience her through our pathos, our suffering, our experience, our incarnate being. Living flesh has the power to transform, to create and recreate itself. From the moment of conception, before there is even the contours of a self emerging, This power is movement. So the very first movement is the heartbeat. Like it's just there's a bloody speck in this new creation, and it starts beating. And that's the first movement we make. And every other movement drives the creation of this being into what we eventually become, and never stops. Movement never stops working through us, even into death. You can think about the decomposition of the body as the continuation and the persistence of movement into the processes of decay and the return to the earth. The potential of transformation is intertwined with our vulnerability, our passibility, to undergo ordeals or ecstasies that transfigure us. Of this passibility, the philosopher Michel Henry wrote, "In the depths of its night, our flesh is God." And it's such a beautiful, image. I meditate on this often. So, we're back to the cup of compassion, of suffering, of passion, of feeling, of empathy. Underlying all this will be the ability, if one does this work, if one cultivates this awareness within the flesh, within the body, won't it awaken us again to each other? Won't we be able to empathize with the other rather than hate? Won't we be able to share and participate and feel joy in another's joy, and to be in distress at another's pain? Is this not what we need now? Is this not the medicine of the cup that we need right now and always, but now more than any other time that I can remember in my existence? So I am fascinated by the nature of the flesh, to be affected and irradiated by the stars in the heaven, as well as by each other. I have found it necessary, because of my health from a young age, to be very involved with the body, with understanding how a body that is in pain or which doesn't work can exist in this world, to understand experiences of altered states of consciousness or disassociation that I went through since a young age, to understand the strange place of dreams in the body, how dreams and the phantasm are somehow shaken from our very flesh. Not simply, they visit us, yes, but sometimes do they not feel that they've just emanated from your very flesh, as though something very deep within you has opened and speaks to you? So the flesh is something which obsesses me and is underlying my hymns to Venus in the morning or the evening, underlying my lighting of the candle on the altar, underlying my stretching, my weightlifting, my whatever I do with my body. I am ultimately engaging in a process of transformation of this flesh and questioning of it, because why is it that I feel this divinity in the depths of my flesh? How is it that I can feel this and recognize it in others and see it in others? And so I think I'm just freestyling now, because this is where my notes break down. If anybody heard my my piece I did for the first Astromagia, I spoke about an idea of Paul Valéry's called the implex. Well, I propose that the seismic rupture of the body consciousness activates what Paul Valéry called the implex, which he defines as a power of transformation, an openness inherent in our being. Our bodies are entangled, mutably and dynamically interwoven with space. And he observes how man, and obviously woman too, is somehow made for more eventualities than we can know. And I think this is also intrinsically linked with my desire to communicate with the heavens, and also underlies what my partner Peter Gray speaks about in the two Antichrists when he proposes this space witchcraft, that we are speaking to the stars, both through our hearts, but also through our actions, what we do. And this drive is coming from our very depths. It's coming in these seismic experiences when consciousness, diurnal consciousness breaks, and you experience the night in the flesh. This allows something to come through us, which may be patterns, archaic patterns that are deeply laid down by our ancestors, or even something we dreamed, or even something given to us in a dream by some divine hand that touches us. And that these things can then emerge through us into the world, because this is, are we not the hands and the eyes and the mouths of these forces? And if we are not to do it, who else will? I'm going to end with a meditation, because this was one of it's a beautiful piece of writing by a mystic and scientist who has inspired me tremendously. He was both a priest, a mystic, a heresy. He was a heresy, and a scientist, a mathematician, a philosopher. He was just an incredible person. He was executed by the Soviet Union because of his ideas. And anyway, I'll read this to you. I have been deeply inspired by Celestial Signs, a text by Pavel Florensky, subtitled Reflections on the Symbolics of Colors. The essay opens. Suppose we went out into the open, preferably at sunrise, or at least when the sun is almost at the horizon. I made a note of the correlation of colors. Directly opposite the sun is violet, lilac, and above all, sky blue. On the side of the sun's pink or orange and red, overhead, transparent emerald green. Let us be aware of what we are actually seeing. We see light and only light. Its varied coloring results from its correlation with that terrestrial and perhaps in part with that heavenly environment that is filled with this one light. Undivided light, continuous light, is in truth continuity. In a space filled with light, it is impossible to single out an area that does not communicate with any other region. Written in Sergiev Posad on the 11th of December, 1919, where he would take walks either at dusk or in the morning on the hill. The essay theorizes Sophia, he was a Sophianic heresy, as an intermediary between the divine and the phenomenal worlds, partaking of both. The heavenly is in continuity with the sublunary realm, at the same time complementary and interpenetrating. I perceive Babalon, the goddess coming into being, in close relation to the heresy of Sophia, but she speaks not of an eternal wisdom, but with a pressing urgency to the moment, and offers us the cup so that we may partake in her understanding. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alkistis. Let me just see where we are. Wow, so much to say. So much to say. Where to begin? We have a little bit of time. We have about 15 minutes. If people have questions, pop them into the chat. We'll bring them in. I shared in the chat ways to reach out, or ways to connect, of course, but I also specifically shared links to visitation and also to your talk that you gave in 2021. Yes. So people should definitely check those out. They're both on, I think they can find them both through Scarlet Imprint, can't they? They can find.
Yeah, everything will be connected to Scarlet.
Yes. Visitation was something that really, I saw it in 2019. It cracked open so much for me. Do you know what I mean? It actually led to this conference happening in the end. And it was, it was kind of like the last push that I needed to actually make this happen.
Yeah.
And I think that what you brought forth in that was so important. I've described it as avant-garde astral sorcery.
Yes, I like that.
And there's so many things to say about it, but one that I'd like to turn to immediately is something that has become more obvious to me as I've started to read more about Aboriginal astrology, mainly this idea that observation is so important in the empirical but also mythic revelation of the world, and that there's something about being so keen to these direct encounters with the sky and your body, as you were speaking. For you're one that definitely is very much on fire. I think you've always struggled with this.
I struggle with that.
Struggled to know, as you said, how to be that. But I think at the same time, it led you towards a challenge to know it better than most. And I think that that this idea of the observational, the direct, like trying to be present to the sky in this way as it awakens our senses is really important. And the piece that you sort of touched on a little bit over and over again that I think is obvious once you start to look at it is that Inana-Ishtar held a lot of significance for oracular power. So it is like this form that also was very much involved in communicating the living voice of the gods to the world. You mentioned it in a couple different ways around its harmonizing force that it brought in different long counts, short counts. But similarly also its tie to oracular capacity. And I wonder if there's more that you might want to say about that, because I think that it's one, like, how is it that this form is like so intimately bound up with the communication of heaven to earth? Venus cannot be denied. The light of Venus is so fucking obvious. You start paying attention to the sky.
She does seem like she's speaking, because when you watch her, she changes so much. And there is this strange, I don't know if it's just because my eyes are not so good anymore, but she does very eccentric things with her rays. I mean, she's transforming all the time as you look at her and as you speak to her. And you can't avoid the feeling that there is a language here. I don't know how to say, like, it's an intuition. It's an intuition because you feel it, and because, as I was speaking about, on the one hand, the Venus omina are recorded as ways of understanding, like, the messages of the gods, the heavenly writing in the sky. But at the same time, the prophetesses and the prophets, they were male, female. I think the Simo Papala talks about in the Assyrian prophecies, most of the prophets were female for Inana-Ishtar. A certain amount were male, and a certain amount are the men who have castrated themselves to become more like her. So there is, although there's a preponderance on the female body as having this connection, it's clear that it's not restricted to the female body, that all bodies, all flesh is able to be spoken through.
Yes.
And she doesn't discriminate. And in herself, she is regarded as both male and female and between in many ways. So there is this, what I find very fascinating about the Mesopotamian, the Babylonian conception of the planet is how bound up it is with these absolutely incredible adventures of a goddess. And although some of the descent has been understood in terms of the descent of Venus, the Venus cycle,
Yes.
there are people who disagree with this, but it does seem very powerfully related to that. And other myths of hers too, I have seen there are various proposals that they have, for example, where she turns various lovers into animals or kills them, or they have some terrible fate, that these are actually representing her conjunction with different asterisms or constellations. But there is also something which is just so human about her. No, you feel her passions, you feel her desire, you feel her anger. And actually, this makes me think one of the things that happens when you are in a enthused and godded with this force, it does massively expand you. In the same way that the star is so expansive and her rays just keep, like, sometimes it feels that they're reaching down to you, and you get these very eccentric, like sometimes there's a sort of a cruciform figure with like a long, sometimes it goes out at the side, sometimes this morning she was almost like a complete round, just emanating but wide, a halo. And sometimes I feel like there are sort of phenomena that appear within this like greater round. Like, I don't know if it's weather or just my eyes, but I see other lights flashing within the aura of Venus. And so there is an incredibly distinctive, an incredibly recognizable thing in this star which no other star exhibits.
Yeah, well, I think that people don't realize it's the
the
sun, the moon, then Venus. Do you know what I mean? It's like people, I know it's like a very basic thing, but if you look at any depiction of sky knowledge across the world, I mean, there's lots to say always. It's very rich, but she's next in line of importance in terms of things. Carry on, though.
Oh, and she seizes the heavenly powers. So she's like, she is the hierodule over heaven. She is prominent, foremost. But again, there is something very individuated about this star, about the goddess, and about what one experiences when one works with her. I can't speak to working with Inana-Ishtar, although I know people who do. But speaking in terms of Babalon, it's quite uncanny that for example, when I first started experiencing these possession states, I would think, oh, like, it makes you feel enormous, like just expanded, and you come out of it feeling like she's really like me, like, and then you realize, like, after a while I realized, oh no, she expands everything in you. She's like this force, she's this light which just massively opens up your anger, your passion, your feelings. So that this is one of the traps with working with this energy, is that you can mistake yourself for her on one level. There can be this identification where you miscognize that this expanded form of yourself with all your flaws, all of your humane like problems, all of your issues, all of your, actually unearths things. So things deeply buried within you come out, and your initial feeling is like, ah, this is fascinating, this is a revelation of the goddess. And in fact it's not, it's simply the way that she works through your body, and it kind of, it blasts through this stuff. But part of the process of that is this weird state you can get into, especially in the beginning, and especially as there is no guidance for this, where you mistake her for being like you, because it's simply, she expands and it sort of makes on a heavenly scale all of these very human aspects of our character,
You
including
spoke about the way that this erotic excess is kind of important, you know, and that but I think that some other things that you spoke to were about the importance of motion, keeping things, you know, keeping it moving.
Yes.
Not allowing it to if it overwhelms, it still moves. Do you know what I mean?
I think the movement is fundamental, and it is one of the things which is where both my body work and my deep obsessive interest in Venus are conjoined. Because, for example, the planet Venus is always changing. We don't see her because she's covered in this sulfuric mantle that creates this hugely luminous, and it seems to have, there may be life in it. So it's both luminous and potentially life-bearing cloud that mantles her. But underneath that, Venus herself is volcanic, and so actively volcanic that her surface is not ever the same. And I think in the same way that I can see this is important in the body, that there's this continual sense of renewal through these processes, then movement, dance, any kind of movement. But also in the mythology, she's always going about somewhere. She is destroying mountains. She is seducing someone. She's going to steal her sister's throne because she wants that power as well. You know, she cannot be contained. She doesn't stop. And if you look at the stars, she is so dynamic. She moves. She waxes and wanes like the moon. She has different, aspects. And she has a perfection like Earth. She has this, she's spherical. Her orbit is spherical. So or it is more perfect than other planets. So there are so many things. If you just look both at the mythology, but also at the mathematics, there was so much I had to leave out, because without pictures to show like cycles and patterns, like the rose patterns of Venus, or the pentagrams she forms in her relationship with Mars around, and it's geocentric as well. So it is again like the Earth, the human, is at the center of this experience. It is we have to be able to both maintain a geocentric understanding of our place in the cosmos, as well as a wider understanding where a scientific understanding where we are not the center, but we are going around the sun. And I think it's so incredibly fascinating.
It is. I agree. And there's so much that could be said. I mean, I think that as with the talk that you gave in 2021, there's so much that can be spoken about there. the last little piece that I wanted to maybe dwell on, because I think it was, you spoke about it in a really lovely way. And I think it directly relates to contemporary expressions of astral magic around the talismanic. This relationship between statues and the way that statues are treated, having interacted with Babylonian statues and their components like the eyes and the jewelry that's on them myself, and really inspired by a lot of that. It's really fascinating to think about this point that you said, that engaging with this allows us to have the ability for this beauty to have a place in the world, and then it can communicate outwards. Do you know what I mean? It can like draw others into it, and that's so much her power. Do you know what I mean? It's not only about the voice, it's not only about what's communicated through speech, but it's also about what's communicated through the flesh. And I mean that in a large flesh. Do you know what I mean? The flesh of the world.
Yes. Yes, this was something that really touched me about the Mesopotamian conception, that there is a continuity between the star and between things like lapis lazuli, that this contains the power, or some of the power, also a connection with the star, and just this ability to then transform the materia around us into these living icons or idols. And to I mean, I had a very profound experience when I was in Peru I think it was last year. Yes, last June. And I was there for a return to take up the cup of ayahuasca again after I had not drunk for nearly 20 years. And at one point I was looking up into the ceiling, this big roof of the tambo that we were in, and I felt all the reeds from the palm trees that had been woven into this beautiful pattern to cover us, rejoicing in the beauty that they had become through human artistry and craft. And just this sense of their song, their absolute rejoicing in themselves being beautiful. And it was this. So if something as simple as a palm leaf can be so wondrous, I mean, how should we be walking on earth with our feet? You know? And what should we be doing with our hands? I feel like any time that we're not creating beauty, we're wasting our potential.
Totally. Yeah, it's that, again, an outlet for that erotic excess. It also ignites it. It brings it more presently into the world, and I think that, I wonder too, if so much of the issue that we have now is how stuck we are. I don't know if that's a word. We've resisted this sort of like natural rhythmic quality of that she is so present to. Why she's so present and powerful at this moment, and why we all, those of us that are called, have to understand that more, because I don't know, there seems like there's something that's been held at bay for so long.
There is a fear of beauty, and there's a profound fear of the body as well. And we are disconnected both from the heavens, because I mean, just simply the amount of light, the way we live is not out in it. And I think, I mean, the phone, all of this electronic stuff, really, it's like a false light. It's a false light. And there is, I think for the future, we have to find a way to actually be with the light and to be with our bodies. And also to bear the pain of being incarnate, rather than drown it out, rather than find distractions. If we are in pain, another experience I had quite, this is the revelation I got, the final revelation I had with the ayahuasca last year was simply that of the bitterness. And I was so lucid for the final, it was in the day, the final ceremony. I drank, and the first cup is always, like, not just any cup, is always just absolutely, it's very bitter, very intense, very difficult to swallow. But I drank it, and I drank it with a spirit of peace in me, with just a complete acceptance. And then it was as if I was possessed by the vine herself, by her intelligence. And then every time I went to drink again, I held for as long as possible the sensation of the bitterness in my mouth and in my throat and in my heart. And I could feel this poison working through my entire body. But this bitterness was, there was just no, how can I say? Again, there was no ecstasy other than just that being present with the bitterness. And it was beautiful. It was so beautiful. It was just that complete acceptance. And I got rid of the blankets, the cushions, anything. I just wanted the rough board underneath me. I just wanted to feel everything. And I just opened myself to everything through this teaching of the bitterness. And it was so, I had asked her to teach me about this. And this is what I understand by theophany, that pure giving of oneself to the experience, without any holding back, without any reserve, just that utter giving of oneself. And I think this is a teaching that Babalon gives. It's a teaching that ayahuasca gave, and it's a teaching, I think, when Simo Parpola talks about, I think this book that Simo Parpola says these things about the prophecy, and there's some problems with it, but there is also a truth in this becoming one with suffering, becoming one with happiness, with joy as well. That simple dissolving of the self into experience, into the flow and the movement of experience. I think that's what's missing from life at the moment. I think everything is so tied up with identity, with projecting, with with things which are not real, which are not flesh. And the future can only lie in actually going into the flesh and coming to terms with that. And it's much easier for me to say this now that I'm 50 and I've been through so much more, including perimenopause, that it is difficult being incarnate. It is a challenge. It is very difficult. But you get up every day and you do it. And you participate in this beautiful gift of life. And I think this is something that Venus teaches when you see her in the sky. I mean, she's just such a jewel. She is the hierodule. She's so beautiful. And she makes you feel that sense of the importance of presence, being present.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's a lovely place to end. So many places to connect with Alcestis, and those will all be below the video for those that are watching later, and I've shared in the chat. Thanks so much, Alcestis. Is there anything you want to mention before we turn it off?
No. I'm happy I made it through this.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being part of this year's conference.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you guys for being here. We'll see you all very soon. Bye now.